I don't know who this movie was made for, but it might just be the most boring One Piece movie to date. Oh boy. One Piece, the movie, episode of Alabasta, the Desert Princess and the Pirates, isn't just a mouthful of nonsense, but it's also the title of the 8th One Piece movie. There's a drastic shift with this film compared to the other ones in the series, where this one is just a retelling of the Alabasta arc. Released on March 7th, 2007, this movie premiered the same week that Nami and crew stumbled upon Hogback's Sindri room in the manga, and the last anime episode that aired was Sanji defeating Jabra. When I realized this movie was gonna try and adapt an arc that took 63 chapters or 37 episodes to tell in only an hour and a half, I was skeptical how well it could possibly be done. If I was grading this movie on the accomplishment of condensing such a sprawling story, I'd say they certainly achieved that, but I still don't understand why, because it just made everything so much worse. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you're familiar with the Alabasta arc, so allow me to list a couple of the streamlined elements to show you how they were changed, rushed through, and undermined. The movie starts with a young Vivi riding on Pell. I actually really like this opening. This takes a scene that the movie staff had the benefit of knowing about and repurposed it to frame the movie around Pell's sacrifice and the act of protecting versus fighting. All well and good, probably the best change. Then it cuts straight to Mr. 2 accidentally arriving on the Mary, where Sanji is also notably present. It cuts straight to the desert and then right away to Yuba, so it entirely skips Ace and Nanohana. There is no Smoker or Tashigi in this movie, there's no rain-based casino either. The first time the Straw Hats meet Crocodile is on the outskirts of Alabasta, where Luffy and Crocodile have a speed run of their original fight. All the Straw Hats vs. Baroque Works fights are cut down just to their core moments, which robs them of any satisfying payoffs. There is no Luffy barrel battle. Instead, he catches Vivi with Pell and then races to challenge Crocodile in the tomb. Finally, there is no Igarum. Instead, his role as Vivi decoy is replaced by his wife. This may all sound like a bunch of trivial nonsense. Of course they had to cut plot lines to make this movie work. But that's if you concede that this is the movie they had to make in the first place. I really don't think they should have gone this route, since I don't think this is a good recap of events for fans of the series, and I think things are too rushed and convoluted to be a good jumping on point for new fans. The story doesn't even explain who Vivi is to the Straw Hats, how they met up, and why they are helping her. So, putting aside the debate on whether or not this movie needed to be made, because what movie needs to be made? I guess I have to applaud the story for condensing so much and being at all comprehensible. But since they went this adaptation route, I think they should have cut a lot more to allow for moments in the story to actually breathe. I'd say the biggest problem with this movie is that it feels as though all the Alabasta arc pre-episode recaps were just strung together for an hour and a half. This movie is extremely jarring to watch. For example, there's the scene where Vivi slaps Luffy, which then cuts to a close-up of Eyelash, then zooms out to everyone suddenly riding on the giant crab. As someone who knows this story, I know what's going on, but how is someone who's watching this for the first time supposed to follow any of it? Although, I do think this movie's greatest sin is how it butchered all the Straw Hats vs. Baroque Works fights, except maybe Sanji's. This is another example of it not being clear who this movie is for. The fights are almost impossible to follow, and definitely impossible to appreciate since they are cut to ribbons, and only someone who has seen the series would know what was happening. But also, if this is for someone who wants to rewatch the fights in updated animation, then they'll definitely be disappointed too. Usopp and Chopper versus Miss Merry Christmas and Mr. 4 skips straight to Merry Christmas telling them that Luffy is dead, Usopp's speech to Chopper, and then defeating them. Nami's fight cuts straight to the final climactact attack with zero explanation of what that weapon is, or why Nami would be surprised when the birds fly out. Then, to top that off, Miss Doublefinger doesn't even get launched through the buildings, she just crashes like a couple dozen yards away, and that's that. The coolness of Zoro's victory also falls completely flat without any context. He gets attacked, then is fine, and cuts Mr. 1. The end. No insight into learning to cut steel or anything. It's all just a complete letdown, and I have no idea why it was done this way. This video has been a lot of me complaining, but I do think this movie invites these comparisons in ways that the other films simply do not. However, I do want to heap on some light praise. I think the animation for this movie looks good. It looks slightly better than what the anime was doing at the same time, and there are some good uses of CGI throughout the movie. But I am disappointed that this movie didn't take this opportunity to try out any new direction, and everything went down pretty much the same way it was adapted previously. Another disappointment I have with the animation is that it was seemingly too afraid to be creepy and upsetting. You know those moments in this arc. Usopp's broken face during his fight, Vivi's look of despair from the clock tower, even Luffy getting stabbed through the chest in the desert. The animation in this movie toned all of that down, so the moments aren't visually as striking. It's a small complaint, but it's odd to me how they got this right years prior, but couldn't replicate it here. I keep trying to pinpoint what exactly is wrong with this film, why I truly didn't enjoy the experience of watching it. I think in part it's because I just finished rewatching Alabasta, so the changes were very obvious to me. I think in part it's because this movie clearly didn't know what it wanted to be. Even with the huge exposition dump at the start, it's immediately inaccessible to new fans, but at the same time, it also butchers fan favorite moments, so it couldn't possibly be made for fans either. I think in part, it's the pacing. Even the climax of the film, Luffy pummeling Crocodile, is rushed. There isn't a glorious beatdown that lingers for just enough time, giving the audience the catharsis and satisfaction of watching this villain finally get what was coming to him. Instead, sure, the same scene happens, but it's too quick. The pacing is atrocious, and there wasn't a single action beat or character moment that got the attention it deserved to really sink in. So, back to a previous point. I think this movie should have focused on being inspired by the Alabasta arc rather than a condensed retelling. I think they should have taken far more creative liberties with the adaptation to make it something entirely unique so that it could tell a story worthy of a movie's runtime rather than the mishmash that it is. Mr. 2 in the beginning could have been entirely cut out since he never tries to trick the Straw Hats, nor does he come back at the end to be their friend. I think the Poneglyph also should have been cut, way too complicated and distracting for such a short film. I think things could have started in the desert on the way to Yuba, get to the old man who can deliver a sense of the devastation to this country, and then move on to Alabarna from there. Keep Luffy's fight with Crocodile in the desert, have his final fight begin on top of the palace with his barrel, and then through some action, it ends up underground. Remove Koza because he's entirely superfluous to this story. Give more attention to the heroic actions of the main characters rather than glossing over them. In the end, I guess my biggest problem with this movie is that it tells an incomprehensible story that cannot be appreciated on its own. So this has been my harshest review to date. I wasn't expecting to dislike this movie as much as I did. Ultimately, for me, it was a big disappointment, but I'm curious what you thought. I'm not even sure how to rate this one. It doesn't conform to my previous movie rating system, so let's just drop that. I think this movie is a 4 out of 10. You may get some enjoyment out of it if you're a fan of this series, but I think the source material is butchered, and there are 2 other mediums that have told this story far better. That's the double-edged sword of trying to make a movie you think will be easier to market because people are already familiar with the story. Now I'm very concerned about the next movie on my list, Episode of Chopper, which seems to be a retelling of Drum Island, but Frankie and Robin are there. I don't know what's going on, but I hope you'll join me for that review. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to my awesome patrons whose support makes this all possible. Until the next time, I'll shut up.